Grant, thank you so much. I hope the audience agrees that it's fascinating and also something that's not being examined, definitely not in the general public discourse. And although, your final assessment is that it wouldn't be successful, I think from what you described, some elements of it would be present in a conventional operation as well. So it's just very important to examine. So speaking of that, let's look briefly, maybe some quick takes on what the full-scale amphibious assault would look like, and would it be successful? The U.S. Navy War College just came out with an assessment, and generally speaking, the majority said no, China is not able to mount an amphibious assault at this time. But what does that exactly mean, and what would the goals be? First, Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we've had a number of war games, and run by the RAND Corporation, by the Air Force, by the Marines, and others to try and understand what the situation would look like, especially if we tried to help out. And most of those assessments are very negative to the U.S. and to Taiwan, that the Chinese have preponderance of force, and if they really meant to use it, they could. So I think what really is important is what the Chinese think. Are they convinced they can do it? And are they convinced the U.S. won't get involved, and then we end up in World War III? I mean, are they convinced about that and they want to risk it? Is it really worth it to them? Or can they take some shorter term? The problem is, that this constant harassment of Taiwan has its natural upper limit, not only because you have to decide what you want to do or not do, but you're basically drumming up support for an invasion in the country, in China. You're talking to people, you say, we're strong, we can do this. It's a very dangerous kind of mood, which leaves them have to do something, because if they don't do something, the government will be humiliated. That's the kind of problem you're getting toward. And this has been going on for, I don't know how long, maybe Grant knows, quite a long time. And it's building up, now it's 28 airplanes, fighter planes, and some bombers crossing over the air defense identification zone into Taiwan's airspace, causing them to scramble their jets, raising tensions. And then a point I would make that I believe is true, and if you recall, I was talking earlier between us about the Hainan Institute incident in 2007, when the Chinese jets attacked an E-3A.
2001.
2001. You're right. Yeah. Sorry. Time goes fast. And so the plane was forced to land on Hainan Island. The Chinese impounded it, arrested our soldiers, and it was a very nasty business. But what was interesting about it, and I recall very clearly, is there was the impression here that this show was being run by the Chinese military, not by the civilian government. And in fact, the civilian government seemed to be ignorant of a lot of what was going on. So, how preponderant is the Chinese military? How far can they go and get away with it? These are unknown. We don't know the answer, but it's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous, because this is a very, this is a government we really have very little insight into, and in the military where we have even less. And so we're always relying on intelligence and other things, which is what it is, not awfully good. So the chance for a surprise, or for someone to go further, or to launch some missiles, or God knows what, all of that's very, very present. As tensions rise, that becomes more likely, because that's what happens when tensions rise. You have to have a way to let the pressure off, or everything will go bang. I think the Chinese are going to be under a lot of pressure, because they're creating it. Unless they back down, which I would urge, and I think our government should urge them in the strongest possible terms, cut it out. pull those planes back. We don't want to see them crossing into the ADIZ anymore. If you do, we're going to meet them with U.S. aircraft. Pull them back. Stop it now before it gets out of hand. That's what I would advise.
And it seems that your view there is the prevalent one, which is that we would be on the back foot. And thank you for fleshing it out on many angles of it. But then, Grant, I'm wondering, and you can comment in any way you wish, but also, do you have anything to say about the War College opinion and why it was what it was?
Well, there were minority opinions, and I would have been in the minority of this. It is what it is. But the question of conventional assault on Taiwan, that large-scale attack, which has an amphibious component, is an interesting one, not to say the least. But the basic, and I found that it's thinking through it, I reached certain conclusions, and the basic problem, of course, is to get across the strait by sea and or air, get a foothold and force the Taiwan government to give up. And the question is, could China do it? Are they willing to do it? I think they probably are if they have to. I can't get Taiwan to submit otherwise, but could they do it? And that's where the analysts will differ. One of the principal arguments that you hear all the time is that, well, China lacks lift. And lift refers to enough ships and aircraft to get you across the strait. And I don't understand the calculations there, because it's got plenty of ships, plenty of aircraft. I would cite that they've got 55 amphibious ships, for example. Some of them are old ones, but old ones work as well as new ones. And unlike us, the Chinese can build them for less than $2 billion a piece. They've got literally thousands of ferries, container ships, roll-on, roll-off vessels, barges, and by 2030, they're going to have even more of these. So they've got plenty of lift if you include the Chinese civilian capabilities, and those things work very well. You've just got to get across the strait once. But if you're just counting on military frontline or the most new amphibious ships, well, maybe they don't have enough, but you don't need them. And the Chinese have shown themselves willing to improvise and use whatever's at hand and use it effectively. Also, the Chinese military trains to incorporate civilian resources. They're constantly exercising this in China and also on a fairly large scale. So I would say that with the right weather, sea conditions, and cover, and I'll describe cover later, that they could probably get a few tens of thousands of troops ashore in a day, that maybe 3 army divisions and a Marine brigade, roughly. Additionally, you throw in your airborne capabilities, and that's dropping paratroopers. They can do that, and they're getting better at it in terms of perfect capability and scale. They've been training for this mission in one way or another for 50 years now. They're working on their joint capabilities, the ability to combine air, sea, and ground units. And that's one of the criticisms, or one of the weaknesses pointed out by a lot of analysts, is they don't do joint operations well. They're not good enough to do it in a large-scale assault on Taiwan. Maybe not, but I'm not so sure about that. They may not be fully trained to the way we would do it, but sometimes you've just got to be good enough. Look at the Argentinians in the Falklands. The British outclassed them in every single respect, and the Argentinians almost won. And unfortunately, the Chinese are not Argentinians. But there's always been a sort of condescension, I've noticed over the years when Americans assess Chinese capabilities for this sort of an operation. It's almost as if, well, they'll never be our equals or able to master these skills, that it's just too hard. And I think that's a dangerous position to have. If you look at how fast China has brought on capabilities that experts said would take them at least a decade more to get. Aircraft carriers come to mind, but they always do things faster and better than have been planned. It's not saying they don't have problems and a boatload of them, but it's good not to underestimate them. And I tend to err on the sort of giving them the benefit of the doubt. So would they come across a beach or come by air or seize a port or an airfield? Probably some of each. Nobody quite knows. If an attack does happen, there will be one guy who figured it out perfectly, and the other 99 analysts will all be kind of wrong, but the one guy will be dining out for free for the rest of his life. Also, there's one of the weaknesses pointed out by the War College was that the Chinese don't have proper logistics for an amphibious assault. Well, if it's logistics of the American kind, maybe not. But sometimes, once again, you just have to be good enough. And if you look at Chinese capabilities for logistics operations in their civilian world, I'm not so sure that I would sort of downplay what the military can do logistics-wise. In fact, one of the comments in the summary of the War College report was that some people said that because they say until China can master joint logistics over the shore, which is a phrase for the U.S. military, until they can master that, they can't invade Taiwan. I'm not so sure I'd count on that. Will we have advance notice of a conventional assault on Taiwan, a large scale one? I would say not necessarily. We've always thought that it'll be like D-Day or the Germans trying to invade England, where you could see the barges in the ports. But I'm not so sure that the Chinese will not be able to get things positioned using their greatly improved rail, air, ship, port infrastructures in eastern China, get it positioned to the point where they could actually go without notice or without us catching it. And even I think DOD says that they could probably do it for the smaller islands without advance notice. So once again, I'm concerned about that. And I mentioned cover, because when you think of an assault on Taiwan in terms of how they would do it, it's not just going to be boats and barges coming ashore with some ships offshore lobbing shells in, but it's going to take place in a much different, more severe context, and that is going to be missile assaults, just a hailstorm of missiles hitting targets in Taiwan. Fifth columnists will be activated. Special forces probably be operating, causing trouble. Airborne drops, cyber attacks, electronic warfare, communications and satellite links will be cut. It's going to be UAV and UAV swarms. The public's going to be targeted. There's going to be huge chaos. Electricity, communications, food, water, all of it out. And then, so that's your context. And the Chinese Air Force will be swarming. The Chinese Navy is going to be all over the place. And then you have the question of U.S. intervention. You've got F-26 missiles that could maybe sink an aircraft carrier on its way. Well, that causes you some problems. So that's when there's a lot of things that go into the possibility of a conventional assault on Taiwan, and the Chinese have systematically gone about trying to master them. And the debate is, have they mastered them enough? It is something that needs to be taken very seriously. And I'd say I would tend to think that they just might think that it's worth it, that they have the capability to do it, and the payoff, from a Chinese perspective, just might be just so tempting. When you think about it, is seize Taiwan, and what message is that sent to every country in the region and the world? It's one that, well, the Americans couldn't stop us, not the U.S. military, not economic or financial threats, not even nuclear weapons. So what chance has anyone else got? Additionally, you seized key terrain in the middle of the first island chain, and you can operate outwards with relative ease from that point. So that's, so you throw this into the mix, and the idea of a conventional assault backed up by all these other activities to cause mayhem, that along with the psychological aspect of it all, that it is something that I would take very seriously, and like the PACOM commanders have said, I think that it is something that needs to be considered in the fairly near future, and steps taken to make sure that it doesn't happen. So that's if they had invited me to the War College game, that's what I would have told them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And with that, we are just about at question time. So let's go to the audience, and there's some interesting ones. So, Steve, you mentioned the China building itself up, and then inevitably that they'd kind of have to follow through. And then, of course, Grant's was about a fifth column. This question is, let's say the Chinese invasion fails. What about those consequences if they do it before they're ready? And number two, what about their fifth column, or what about their domestic troubles if they fail? Steve, let's start with you.
We don't know. The one good news in China is the Chinese Communist Party controls the press. It controls all information. It controls social media. It controls social media, internet. So, the question is how the public would react. Maybe they'll react. They want China to use nuclear force against Taiwan. Who knows? I mean, it's a very volatile situation. And I think what's missing in the equation, I tried to get at when I was putting what I would do thesis on the table, is we have to give them some real warnings. And we have to show them that we're, right now the jury is still out on what the U.S. might do. What will Biden do? What would Trump have done? The jury is really out. And I think we have to show them that we will do. Just sailing a ship through the Taiwan Straits does, the Chinese complain about it, but it's not actually much of a threat. But when you tell them we're going to put our Air Force up, if they cross into Taiwan's airspace again, and we're going to face us just as much as the Taiwanese jets, then you got a different game. Very different game.
I would say that if you keep backing off, and the other side thinks that you're not, at the end of the day, you're not going to fight. You've got some problems, and that's a lesson that most people learn by about the age of 5 in the schoolyard. In terms of what the response of the Chinese public would be to an assault that doesn't go well, those things are always hard to gauge, as Stephen said, though I think one might suggest that in the initial phase, there would be a sort of a rallying of support, sort of this outpouring of patriotism. And once your people start getting killed, then there's sometimes a tendency to say, well, let's really go get them now. And then as some time passes, though, the butcher's bill gets bigger and bigger. Then people start to turn sometimes against the regime that has got them into this mess, particularly if they're starting to suffer. Once again, the Falklands is such a fascinating example. It's small, of course, but there are some things that are worth looking at in that regard. But also, if China does invade or attack Taiwan, even in the offshore islands, but particularly against Formosa, I think they would see that all of their international trade stops, except with North Korea and maybe or what they can send overland to Iran. They have to weigh that into account. This entire trading network that they have got in place, it's going to stop. Additionally, they could find themselves cut off from the U.S. dollar system, and that puts them in another problem, in another serious position as well. They've got to feed their people, and also, if they do, say, attack Taiwan, it's going to even convince the quislings that you find in the U.S. and Europe, who would really sell out their birthright for a slice of Chinese cash. Even a lot of them are going to have to say, look, this is enough. So there's some ripple effects of an attack on Taiwan that it will feel anyway. And if it's not a successful attack, it just gets even worse. Hopefully that's something that Beijing is considering, and hopefully it's something that we realize that we have a good hand to play if we choose to play it.
I think this is something you might have brought up on the last time we were here, Steve, but it's questioning about the chip supply chain. What if what if Taiwan's dominance diminishes in the chip supply chain? Would that create a political environment better for the PRC?
Won't make the high-tech industry in California happy. Won't make the car industry happy either, because they need the chips for the computers, for the cars, these and sensors, all that stuff. So it will have an economic, for sure have an economic impact. Some of them, Taiwan Semi, which is the biggest company in Taiwan and the most important one we rely a lot on, is setting up some plants in the U.S. So never too late. And people are going to have to decide where they want to be in 20 years. And it would be good if our government encourages Taiwanese industry, including its defense industry. I've advocated that for a long time, to become our partner and to be present in the United States and to manufacture in the United States, defense and the commercial. Today, dual use is, technology, electronics, especially, but not only, materials as well, is a very important area for economic survival and military. So that would be my thought.
Grant, you're in Japan. There's a simple question here. Where is Japan in all of this?
They're watching to see what the Americans do. They absolutely refuse to take the initiative. There are some Japanese, I think Vice Defense Minister Nakayama, who would like, I think he knows that Japan ought to be doing more, but they wait to see what America does, and then they try to figure out what the minimum they have to do is, and then do a little less. No, I'm joking about that. This is what comes of 30 years of resentment. But no, that Japan knows that it's got a problem with Taiwan if Taiwan comes under Chinese control, because one, Japan will be brought into an attack on Taiwan, and if not, Japan will be next. So they know this. But they are, as I say, following to see, they're looking to see what America is going to do. And if America decides that it is going to actually support Taiwan, defend it, that you'll find the Japanese come along. I think that they won't do it on their own initiative, but they'll wait to see what we do. And then I think that you'll see that Japan might give us a pretty nice support. They have some very good niche capabilities in the anti-submarine warfare, undersea warfare, and their Navy's very good. The rest of their military needs improvement, and if we insist that they do, they probably will. But they're waiting to see what we do, and but they definitely know that adage, Taiwan's defense is Japan's defense. That's true, but they need to do more. Despite the Biden summit, the Biden-Suga summit, where they talked about Taiwan, they didn't really require the Japanese to do anything in particular. So that remains to be accomplished.
What are your thoughts on cyber, bioweapons, and subversion as the new conventional, meaning we won't see large-scale military operations? So, Grant, you already talked about subversion. Anyone about cyber or bioweapons?
Well, the Chinese have been hitting the Taiwanese for a long time with cyber attacks of all kinds, both trying to steal information, destroy the critical infrastructure, disrupt power supply, hit their banking system. They're doing all that. Nothing that says the Taiwanese can't do it to the Chinese. And if I were them, I'd be working hard on that. I mean, tit for tat. There's a lot more targets in China than there are in Taiwan.
Yeah, I think that the conventional warfare, is never going to go away. At the end of the day, you've got to have that ability to actually physically coerce somebody if they don't surrender. And so, I don't think it's a bio-warfare, cyber attacks. It really makes life miserable for people, but it may not be enough to get them to submit to your will, and that is sometimes does require what we'd call a regular military to do it. That would be my sense of it.
Here's an interesting question or suggestion. What value would you place in having the U.S. Navy prepared to seize China's instant islands in the South China Sea as a counterbalance?
Why? Why?
Okay.
I think they indeed have I have an opinion. But,
Sure.
Well, my opinion is just that would be too far away from the action, and it wouldn't be very meaningful.
Yeah, I would prefer. There's probably other things you could do. I would say, sink 300 of Costco's big transport ships, or close down the Chinese port where they're operating around the world. That would probably be something better to do, more effective. And also, once again, the U.S. dollar is still the one big club that we've got to wield, and that is perhaps where I would apply the pressure. But I understand the argument. I'm not so sure the Chinese would miss those islands very much, and sort of hanging on to them would be some effort. But I would probably apply pressure elsewhere, were it me.
Let's just do like a lightning round on the way these two entities would respond. We have about 2 minutes. So how would Russia respond and how would NATO respond? Let's start with Steve.
NATO wouldn't do anything. It's not their fight. It's not covered by NATO treaty. It has nothing to do with NATO. Russia, I think the Russians would wait and see what happened. I mean, because from the Russian point of view, the Russians are never sure where they are with China. You can argue, and I think we should be arguing, that there are more reasons geopolitically for us to try and work out some deals with the Russians to balance the Chinese than it is to let the Russians and Chinese team. But I think from the Russian point of view, the same is true. I mean, they're going to watch. They're going to watch. They're not going to intervene.
And Grant, did you have any?
Well, I would agree on that. I think for the Russians, this would be, or Putin in particular, this would be a win-win if there ever was one, to have the Chinese and the Americans at each other's throat.
Right.
I would expect North Korea to maybe do something at China's behest to complicate things for us, and would part of it. NATO, Stephen's probably at the end of the day right. I don't think they have much to do, but at the same time, you never know when, sort of decent people will speak up, and maybe they would go along with sanctions or something. But in terms of a sort of a military support role that they could play, it's hard to know exactly who would do that.
I'm reminded that when the Italians supported us in Afghanistan, they made sure their airplanes didn't have any guns or ammunition.
Yeah, but once again, it all depends on the nature of the fight. If it is something that is just ghastly and on the front, it's the sort of front page news every single day. Sometimes that changes thinking, and you may find NATO sort of standing up on its hind legs, and the Europeans more than they would otherwise. But if it's something that you can ignore or rationalize, humans are pretty good at that. Be my take.
We'll have to close it out there. Thank you so much, Grant Newsham and Stephen Bryan, for joining us today. Just some quick announcements. Next Thursday, June 24th, we have a very special guest. Unfortunately, I can't say who it is, so we're just going to tease that. But if you heard about this event, you'll get a mailing on that. The following Wednesday, June 30th at 1 p.m., we're welcoming author Robert Spencer, who will discuss his new book, Islamophobia and the War on Free Speech. That'll be moderated by the Center's Kyle Scheidler. Well, we certainly enjoyed having you here today. Remember, the Center's thought-provoking events like today's are only possible because of your generous support. If you did enjoy it as much as I did, please consider visiting our website at securefreedom.org, clicking on the big white donate button in the upper right corner, where you can make an instant contribution by credit card or get information about other methods of giving. Thanks again to our guests. We'll see everyone next week. Thanks very much.